The least sexy group on a football field might actually be the most productive trio when it comes to the Colts. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right. Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. What up, y'all? This is Jake Arthur and Zach Hicks of HorseshoeHuddle.com. I am a member of the Colts media, and Zach is the preeminent, our resident film nerd here in the market as well. So no one better. Today, we continue our look at each position group. Finally, it feels like this one's been in the making for a long minute now. But we're looking at the interior line today. And like I mentioned, no one loves always talking about the interior offensive line, but it's actually quite important. We'll explain that today. And at least for the Colts, they've got one of the premier trios in the NFL when it comes to interior line play, led by Quenton Nelson, Ryan Kelly, and Will Fries. So we'll obviously start out with the kind of the main course there, those guys. But nipping at their heels, there are some younger guys that the Colts have drafted recently that, you know, they're going to eventually start needing to get some reps. There's a couple veterans that factor into this thing as well. And then ultimately, Zach is going to explain to us why the interior of the offensive line is so important to making Shane Steichen's system and the run game work as well as it does. So start out with the big three. So Quenton Nelson, back on his BS, as they say, one of his better seasons, at least, in comparison to this back half of his career so far. He was back to being, one of the best interior offensive linemen in all of football last year. Played in all 17 games, over 1,100 snaps. Only allowed one sack this last season, which he's got a few 1 sack, 0 sack seasons to his name throughout his career, and 21 pressures. So he's always been a very solid run blocker, obviously, but in terms of pass protection, this was one of his better seasons as well. So Nelson was really good. Ryan Kelly obviously missed some time, 14 games out of 17, 882 snaps. He's only played a full season in 3 of his 8 seasons, so obviously that's something we're going to get to. And then Will Fries, that's a guy that just keeps getting better and better. No one really better in the Colts market, or probably anywhere to talk about Will Fries than Zach, maybe other than Fries' parents, maybe. But Zach was in on him from the jump. A 7th round pick a few years back. Started all 17 games for the Colts, over 1,100 snaps. Pro Football Focus didn't love him this year, but just watching him, actually watching him play, he passes the eye test. I think this was definitely the most productive he's been. So, Zach, you've watched a ton of film. You did a piece on Will Fries recently. Your most recent piece was on Jonathan Taylor. So obviously your eyes were glued to that offensive line as well. So tell us what you saw with this big three in the interior.
Yeah, I mean, these 3 guys are the engine that drives this offense in a lot of ways. I mean, look, we'll talk about it in segment 3 when we're really going into detail about this run game and talking about just how vital these 3 guys are. But this scheme lives in inside zone and split zone and a lot of interior type of things. And these 3 guys have to be at the top of their game for this type of scheme to succeed. But yeah, when you're talking about these guys individually, I mean, Quenton Nelson, I think, is up there top 1 or top 2 in terms of guards as a pass blocker. I think he's a fantastic pass blocker, and something that doesn't get talked about enough with him, and maybe some area where, you see his grade get hurt a little bit for things like Pro Football Focus, is when it comes to how much he's responsible for at that left guard position. His eyes are constantly scanning for late threats, for blitzes, for loopers, for ways that he can help his tackle and help his center on the other side. He is someone who, when you think of like student of the game and like that savvy ability that a player brings, it's something that's not really talked about with someone like Quenton Nelson because he's so fantastically gifted with his athleticism and his strength. But really where he separates himself is in the mind. He is such a smart player in the passing game to go along with being this fantastically strong and athletic player as well. And that's why we've seen him be one of the best pass blockers in the NFL the last couple of years and why he's going to be a Hall of Famer one day. Fantastic player, really got back to where he needed to be last year and what came I think, one vote short of being a second team All-Pro last year. So Quenton Nelson's back to being who he is. You would like to see a little bit better production in the run game, but at the end of the day, if I'm getting this elite pass blocker, I can take him being an above average run blocker. I'd rather it be higher, but I'll take above average run blocker with an elite pass blocker. Ryan Kelly, again, looked like an earlier version of himself. He looked like the 2018, 2019 version of Ryan Kelly this past season, which was great to see because it looked like it was going downhill in 2022. Kelly's getting up there in age. He's, in the twilight of his career, so to speak. And we don't know how much longer he's going to be with the Indianapolis Colts past this season. But when he was out there last season, he looked like Ryan Kelly. He had flashes and moments where he was the best offensive lineman on this entire Colts roster and did some really, really good things in the run game in particular. So Kelly got back to being who he was last year. It was great to see. And hopefully he can stay healthy this year. Like you mentioned, only 3 of his 8 seasons in the NFL, he's been able to stay healthy for the entire year, or at least played in every single game. You would like to see your center suit up for every single game because it's such a vital piece of your offensive line. But when he's on the field, he's kind of like Braden Smith in that regard, where it's like when he's on the field, the impact is clearly there. It's a fantastic player when he's on the field. He just has to stay healthy and hopefully avoid the concussions. I think he's up to like 6 now in his career. Like, it's insane how many concussions he has had at this point in his NFL career. So if you're going to avoid anything, please avoid those concussions there. But then Will Fries is a player who every single year in the NFL has gotten better and better, particularly as a pass blocker. I think last year as a pass blocker really saw him settle in and do some really good things. I think he's a fantastic pass blocker when he can get his hands on first, when he can be aggressive in his sets, when he can attack the assignment in front of him and just use those long arms and that big frame to just engulf his assignment. He's a fantastic pass blocker. He locks it down. He has the savvy and the strength and the anchor to lock it down right there. I think there were some issues when it came to stunts and twists and him having to move laterally. He's not the most fluid player. He's a little bit stiff in the hips, but overall, an above average pass blocker, a perfectly fine run blocker. You want to see him bring a little bit more aggression there, but overall, Will Fries did some good things, and he's giving you like Mark Lewinsky level play at right guard, which if I told you that in 2022 or 2021, when the Colts had been missing what Mark Lewinsky brought to this team when he was here in 2018 and 2019, I do think you would all take that right there. You would all take Will Fries being a Mark Lewinsky level player. I'm hoping Fries can take that next step this year, though. If he can be a little bit more aggressive and tenacious in the run game, if he can be a little bit more fluid in the passing game, or just add more strength overall to kind of combat his lack of fluidity, then the Colts could have this trio where, right now it's probably like a top 5-ish trio in football when they're all healthy. They could really be up there like top 1, top 2, top 3 if Fries takes that next step. So Fries is kind of the X factor on this interior, but as it stands right now, the floor of this group is fantastic. I mean, just these guys all playing, if they stay out there healthy all season and they gave you what they gave you last season in 2023, you're going to have a really, really good interior offensive line. So it's clearly the strength of this Colts offense. All 3 of these guys are experienced, know what they're doing. You have some high-level play from Quenton Nelson and Ryan Kelly, and Fries is no slouch either. So, yeah, I really like this interior group. It was definitely one of the strengths coming in last year for Shane Steichen, and it remains one of the biggest strengths on this entire roster right now.
Yeah, I don't think it's much of a stretch to say, especially when they're healthy, that this is one of the best interior groups. I mean, Nelson, again, the eye test, the numbers say it. Guys we follow online that study specifically O-line play, like Brandon Thorne, for example. Nelson was back. Ryan Kelly, if you go by Pro Football Focus, he got his best grade last year. And again, just 14 games, but you get that guy healthy and he's obviously productive. And then Fries is a guy who you see him, he's getting better every year. So everyone healthy, that is an outstanding group that could really do some nice things for the run game especially. But I mean, keeping Anthony Richardson's, interior pressure clean, that would obviously be great. So coming up next, it's not just those three, but there are a couple really nice veterans that have been mixed in, but also some young guys that are probably going to be starting sooner rather than later. Gametime makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually begin to decrease the closer that it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Here are some of the best parts about it. They've got last-minute deals, which means you can save up to 60% off of buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. They've got the zone deals. Save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seats. Views from your seat, you get a panoramic view but ahead of time so that you can actually see what your view is going to be like before you get there. And then, of course, they have the lowest price guarantee, which means they'll give you 110% of the difference if you find better tickets in the same spot at another competitor. Me personally, it's not just lip service with Gametime. My wife and I were, our friends were asking us if we wanted to go to a concert coming up in a couple weeks, and the ticket prices, not great. Did not love it. And my wife was talking about that. We're kind of hemming and hawing about whether we were going to go. And I said, you know what? Hop on Gametime, see what it's like, and use our code. And lo and behold, tickets still not great, but $20 cheaper. So it legitimately worked. So Tyler Childers, if you're going out there in a couple weeks, again, I feel you're paying on ticket prices, but if you haven't yet got the tickets, Gametime has got you covered. So again, take the guesswork out of buying tickets to your events with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
And are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Jake, so we're transitioning now, talking about the backups behind the starters. Now, hopefully, none of these guys play a snap this next season. Ideally, none of the backup offensive linemen ever have to take the field for your favorite team when it comes to the NFL. But unfortunately, we know this way too well here in Indianapolis. That's never the case. Your backup offensive linemen, arguably more important than your starters when it comes to the Colts. And last year, again, we saw injuries happen to Ryan Kelly. We saw Braden Smith, obviously, at right tackle, and at left tackle, Bernhard Raimann missed some time too. The Colts were lucky last season with Fries and Nelson not missing much time. But again, Nelson has had his fair share of injuries in the NFL. Fries has stayed relatively healthy, but that's a death blow right there for anyone with Indianapolis. So we're looking at guys like Tanner Bortolini, who was just drafted in the 4th round. We're looking at guys like Matt Gonsalves, who was just drafted in the 3rd round. He can play some guard or tackle. Sills is here. Josh Sills is still here as a backup offensive lineman. You still have coming back for his 4th year here, Danny Pinter coming back as a center as well. So they do have some quality names there behind those starters. But I think the big part of this conversation really isn't for 2024. It again transitions more towards 2025, where are Bortolini and Gonsalves going to be ready to potentially start that season if Fries and Kelly are entering their last year with the Colts?
Yeah, and that's where this whole thing comes up, is Ryan Kelly and Will Fries are both free agents after the season. And even though everybody was brought back in free agency this year, it's, especially in the interior, it's kind of a big thing that next year a lot of them are going to hit free agency again, and realistically they won't all be back. So again, Tanner Bortolini, you almost want to pencil him in as the heir apparent to Ryan Kelly. Matt Gonsalves can play some tackle. He was tackle at Pittsburgh, but it looks like if the Colts allow Will Fries to move on, that's probably your right guard. Braden Smith is kind of an X factor in this whole thing as well at right tackle. I mean, but there's no reason to think right now that he won't be back in his normal role and continue his career and all that. So you're really looking at those guys eventually filling in because of free agency, which is what you hope. But the reality with the Colts, like you mentioned, is that we've really seen some of these guys become studs as a result of filling in because of injuries.
Yeah.
You know, Braden Smith became that stud right tackle, even though he was drafted to be the other side of Quenton Nelson at right guard. Injuries forced him in there. You know, we saw Blake Freeland had to play a ton last year. Mark Glowinski, who you talked about, was a guy who had to play because of injuries. So a lot of these guys kind of get thrown into the mix because of injuries. Wesley French is another good example from last year. All the time that Ryan Kelly missed, you have French out there with 3 starts, and he saw 270 snaps. And he played decently well in that time. So the nature of the beast in the NFL, and particularly with the Colts, is guys are going to miss time, and you got to hope that your depth is solid. We know Wesley French can play. Josh Sills, he's a guy who has a good chance to make it for the Colts. They seem to like him. He played 37 snaps last year. He's kind of a Gonzalez type guard tackle. But you really hope if you're going to see any of these guys, it's Bortolini and Gonzalez. Because they're your more long-term outlook type of players. But yeah, outside of that, you know, Danny Pinter, obviously we've seen him at center and right guard. It's vastly different. Pro center, you know, right guard did not go well. So you've got some guys that can play. You hope you don't see any of them, but if you do, hopefully it's these young guys.
Yeah, and I think the Colts have done a good job, at least this year. And I know the draft is a big part of that because the Colts actually invested quality draft picks in these players, but I think they did a good job of just shoring up that offensive line depth. Again, last year, it wasn't their worst season they've ever had with injuries on the offensive line, but still, when you look at it at the end of the season, how many snaps did all the 5 starters play together? It wasn't a ton. It wasn't that many games. I can only think of like 3 or 4 games off the top of my head where all 5 offensive linemen started and finished the game.
Yeah, I think they started like 5 or 6 games together, and they didn't finish it all. They just started like 5 or 6 together.
Yeah, if you even look at that Week 18 game against Houston, Braden Smith gutted it out until, halfway through the third quarter, and then he had to leave with that injury that he was playing through. So injuries happen, big part of the game on the trenches when it comes to the offensive line. And having guys to back up your starters be players like Matt Gonzalez, who was a top 100 pick for you, a player they traded up for, a player they really believe in, who did some good things in college. Having a guy like Tanner Bortolini, and then having your extra guys being your Danny Pinters and your Sills and like those type of players, and Wesley French, like that's a big upgrade compared to what they had last year. Like I'm not saying that like those guys are going to immediately be so much better than like a Wesley French or a Josh Sills, but just having players that you are investing these draft picks in, players that you believe in, who are young players coming in here and not just, again, like undrafted free agents or waiver claim guys, you know, having legit players that you are investing capital in be your backup players. I think that's an upgrade over what they had. And you also can look at, you know, Blake Freeland taking the next step at tackle. You got Witt coming back to at left tackle as well. Gonzalez can fill in at tackle. Like the offensive line depth, I think on paper this year is looking much stronger than it has in recent seasons for the Indianapolis Colts. So, you know, we're past the days of Julian Davenport and Sam Tevy and all of those guys that we're backing up. You know, we have guys who, look, these guys might not be better than Davenport and Tevy and all those guys, but at least the Colts are investing something in them. This isn't a 1-year, $1 million contract to come in here and be your 6th offensive lineman. These are players they spent a top 100 pick on, a top, 150 pick on in terms of Freeland and Bortolini as well. And they have high hopes for in the future. So I'm excited to see what these players can do if they get on the field at all this year. If not, I'm excited to see what they can do if they get the chance in 2025, because with the way the guard and center markets are looking right now, Will Fries is a one healthy season away, like one healthy, non-awful season away from getting $10 to $12 million per season, on the open market. Ryan Kelly is a former Pro Bowler. Like even if he only plays like 15 games this year or 14 games this year, someone's going to give him like a 1-year, $12, $13 million contract, whatever it's going to be on the open market. So if the Colts want to save some money, they still have to extend Dayo Dangbo. They still have other players coming up for contracts. If they want to save some money, the cheap option is Bortolini and Gonzalez going forward. But we'll see what happens. Obviously, there's a lot of moving parts to that. Again, Hopefully neither of those young players play a snap this year. That way we can have the Colts offensive line stay healthy. But we know how it is with the Colts. There's going to be injuries. Injuries happen. And guys like Bordelini and Gonzalez, the Colts obviously believe in enough to where they're going to, get out there on the field and hopefully do some good things for this team.
Yeah, I hate to put a lot of reliance on young guys, but at least if anything happens to this starting five, I do feel more comfortable now because, like you said, they've invested real NFL currency in these guys.
Yes,
so
that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Even if it's Anthony Richardson or Joe Flacco, like I feel better about how the line will perform. Because like almost with quarterback, we saw it at the beginning of 2022, if your line's not right, your offense will not function whatsoever. So they've at least got decent backups to develop. So coming up next, we're going to talk about how this offense as a whole should look and, what the interior does for its functionality. All right, Zach. It's Zach, right? So we're going to talk about the interior of the line, just Nelson, Kelly, and Will Fries. And, specifically, we'll branch out to the passing game as well because, the RPO game has a lot to do with it. But when these three are healthy, on and clicking, and let's say it's Anthony Richardson back there being coached by Shane Steichen, how dynamic can things be and how should this thing look?
Yeah, I think when you look at Shane Steichen's past and you look at what he did this past year in particular with the Colts, the Colts like to live in that inside zone, split zone type run game. They like to get the running game, particularly the running backs, moving up the field quickly, getting those positive yards up the middle. And, if you can break some big runs off that, that's great. And then they'll mix in some outside runs. So for the most part, this is not like an old Shanahan type offense where we're going to run, running back stretch off tackle like 20 times a game. Like that's not what this offense is. This offense lives in the gun. They live in using the running back to threaten the middle of the field and using the running threat at quarterback to threaten the edges. And then occasionally they'll mix in some other wrinkles to it. But when you look at that in totality, again, the scheme does a really good job of just pinching defenders and making them have to think and lighten the box and move out of the frame. But the interior offensive line has to win their matchups. They have to be right in their steps. They have to be right in who they're getting. They have to be right in, how they climb to the second level and take their angles, staying on their zone tracks. Like these are really, really important things for this running game to operate because, you're not going to feel the threat of the inside run with your running back if that run is not being effective. What kind of opens up the quarterback run game is the running back run game actually being a threat on the interior, because then you have players crashing down and then Richardson can keep it around the outside for a big gain, or you can pull it for an RPO and all the other things that this scheme wants to do. So yeah, I think when you're looking at the type of running game that the Colts deploy, again, it's not this one where we need all of our interior players to be these supreme athletes that are going to reach insane blocks. We're not going to ask our right guard to reach a 3-tech on the left side because we're pulling a stretch run to the other side. It's nothing like that. It's more so get that instant displacement on the inside run, get to that second level, and just create that positive yardage for Jonathan Taylor or Zach Moss, whoever the running back is. That way we can mix in the wrinkles of the quarterback run on the outside and actually have the numbers on the outside to make that work. So yeah, the interior offensive line is kind of the main thing when it comes to this running game. Again, with this scheme, it's about limiting the box, but the box still needs to be pushed around when it's limited by defenders there. So this interior offensive line was a big part of what the Colts were able to do in the running game last year. It was a big part of Zach Moss having a career best season, a big part of Jonathan Taylor having that explosive game in Week 18 against the Houston Texans. If you're looking at those games on film, Quenton Nelson, Will Fries, Ryan Kelly, they were moving guys around at will in those games. You look at how the Colts end games, how when they had a lead late in games against the Pittsburgh Steelers, against the Tennessee Titans, and Shane Steichen wants to get into that, hey, we're going to run the ball 20 straight times. He's running it up the middle. These aren't really many toss plays or any stretch plays. It's running it behind their power, which is Quenton Nelson and Ryan Kelly. And then again, Will Fries coming from the other side too. So, interior offensive line is obviously massive in any team's running game, but even more so in how the Colts operate. You look at how Shane Steichen did it in Philadelphia. He's running off of Jason Kelsey. He's running off of Landon Dickerson up the middle, and they carried that forward to what the Colts do with Ryan Kelly and Quenton Nelson. So, to put the long spiel short here, the interior offensive line is massive for the Colts. They want to run up the middle with their running backs, and they're going to run behind those top two players in Kelly and Nelson until it doesn't work. So it's a big part of everything the Colts like to do in the ground game.
And you mentioned how he operated in Philly, and it just got me to thinking this was not, it didn't factor in at all last year because of the personnel, but if the tush push is ever going to be a thing here in Indy, that's huge. I mean, you'll have the quarterback to run it. You'll have a guy like Jonathan Taylor to run it, even though Zach Moss would have been fine pushing ahead as well. But honestly, the interior of that is huge. Guys understanding leverage and how to get the push there. I did want to mention that because it very well could be I don't want to say significant part, but it might be something we see a lot now that the correct personnel is there. But you were just talking about, the different duties of those guys, and something I've had to kind of learn or just remind myself of a lot is, when you think of blocking an offensive line play, you just kind of generally a lot of guys just think of one-on-one matchups, this lineman versus the defensive lineman. And that's just not how it works. Like, there is so much teamwork, so much thinking, and the continuity is huge. So having those three guys and them all knowing, and especially the running backs being able to read off that as well, and you can add Anthony into it, knowing where guys are going to be and their tendencies and how they like to do things allows things to run so much smoother than having a revolving door of new guys in there. So as much as physical gifts and being able to physically block someone is very critical, obviously, the mental aspect of it and being able to trust and know what the guy next to you is going to do, that's huge too. So that's honestly, if for nothing else, having those three guys healthy and together so the whole offense knows what's going on, I think that's huge.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing I want to say about the scheme too is I do think the Indianapolis Colts system and the players they have in place makes offensive line play much easier in every regard. I mean, if Anthony Richardson is starting at quarterback, he's a quarterback who doesn't take many sacks. I know he took a couple more than what we expected last season because he's running out of bounds like 1 yard short of the line of scrimmage. But even if he does take sacks, he's not taking massive losses or anything like that. He's really good with how he moves within the pocket. So in the passing game, your responsibility is kind of lessened to a degree because even if you get beat, your quarterback's going to cover for you and he's going to make that guy miss in the backfield. But when it comes to this run game in particular, Shane Steichen is really good at making every single run play look exactly the same, even if they are different calls. So they'll live in this inside zone, split zone type world for a good 45% of their offensive calls, but then they'll mix in a trap play. Then they'll mix in a power play, where they'll pull Quenton Nelson across the line and he'll kick out a dude. They'll wham Braden Smith inside on the nose tackle and kind of create that leverage there. And that gets these defensive linemen thinking and guessing to where it makes it easier for interior offensive linemen to dig out their assignments and create that displacement up the field. So when you factor that in there, you factor in the threat of a rushing quarterback that just makes guys miss. You factor in Jonathan Taylor, who is this fantastic problem solver in the backfield, where if you do miss your block, Jonathan Taylor is going to make that guy miss and still create positive yardage. I think playing interior offensive lineman for this Indy system, I don't want to say it's easier than most teams because, there's no such thing as an easy task in the NFL, but they are set up for success in Indianapolis, maybe more so than some other places because of the scheme and because of the players around them. So I do like the outlook for this Colts run game and this Colts offense with those factors in mind. And like you mentioned, with these guys going into their 2.5 seasons playing together, because Fries is going to be his second full season starting on the offensive line and basically 2.5 seasons in a row of him starting on the offensive line. It helps the offensive line play on a tether. That's a big way that I like to describe offensive line plays. I want my offensive linemen to play on a tether together. I want them to be tied together. I want every step to be in sync and be where it needs to be. I don't want it to be, one guy's blocking 10 yards away from another guy when that's not the play design. I want it to be where basically if you tied these guys' legs together, they're moving in sync and moving together and moving in pattern and playing offensive line on that tether there. So when you look at this Colts run game, I think it's only going to be better going into year 2 with this system. Having the threat of Anthony Richardson as the quarterback is a big thing there. And then the scheme, again, every run play looks the same, and that just makes your offense better because you can hit them with inside zone, inside zone, inside zone. And that trap play will break for a 20-something yard gain because the defensive line is crashing forward, expecting an inside zone. Shane Steichen does a really good job with that. But yeah, I think this interior offensive lineman is the catalyst to all that. They still have to perform their duties. They still have to drive guys out of their spots. And when you have three guys who are at least above average at their position, you have a really good outlook for your team.
Yeah, even if PFF may or may not have not been super favorable with their guard rankings. What was Quenton 11th, and then Fries didn't exist?
So just to add proper context, I think in the passing game, all three of them were top 15 at their positions. So I think in the passing game, they were really high on these guys. In the run game, Nelson was a bit lower and Fries was a bit lower. I think Kelly was pretty high regardless in both. But yeah, it's tough to put numeric grades on offensive line play. It's really, really difficult. So I'm not even going to just trash PFF or anything like that. I think they're a great resource for this stuff, but I do disagree a little bit with what they were saying with some of these things. But overall, again, I think these are really, really good interior offensive line players for the Colts, and they're going to be a big part of the Colts' future this next season and maybe going forward as well. Before we get out of here, though, guys, I do remind you that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on the Amazon Fire TV app and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available in the free Fire TV channels app. If you guys don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter. Also subscribe to us on YouTube where we list your podcasts. We love your guys' ratings, reviews, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow afternoon covering interior defensive line.